Hello, 6th graders. Today in class we looked at reducing to the absurd, or reductio ad absurdum. Remember that this is such an old concept in the writing of dialogues that this technique has its own Latin name because this is originally a Latin technique. And I'm going to be working on a dialogue. This is not one that you all wrote. This is one that I wrote tonight in order to give you a good example of reduction to the absurd. Simplicio argues about how the king alone has the power to make laws. Sagrado chooses to limit his power by signing Magna Carta. The barons force King John to sign it, and then Sagrado makes an interesting argument here. And the essence of it is this. Simplicio says that Magna Carta is not really a law because the barons forced the King of England to sign it. But Sagrado points out that if the king is forced into making a law, then it must not have any power. And Simplicio is all over that. He's really happy about that. And Sagrado then asks if the king's laws are always right. And Simplicio says, of course, because that's the position that he's chosen to argue here at the beginning. But then Sagrado says, how do I know if a king has really made a particular law? And Simplicio points out that he puts his signature and seal on a copy of the law. And Sagrado, as our textbook tells us, and as Sagrado tells us here, Magna Carta has King John's signature and seal on it. So even though the barons forced Simplicio, or the barons forced King John to sign Magna Carta, the real truth of the matter is that it has King John's signature and seal on it, and that's what makes it a law under the English legal system at the time. Now, I'm not really being fair to Simplicio. This is what's known as a straw man argument. Most of us would make Simplicio, or most of us arguing with a real person, would discover that Simplicio is really not this easily tricked. And of course, King John could have tried to repudiate his seal and signature and convince people that he had been forced to sign this. And in fact, that's what actually happened, but it didn't happen right away. Here's a slightly more complicated version of the reduction to the absurd. Sagrado points out that the barons of England forced King John to sign Magna Carta, which created Parliament. And yet the only way to know whether or not a law is really a law is if it has the king's signature and seal on it. And then he goes on to say, shouldn't nobles obey the king's laws? And Simplicio has to agree with that. If nobles don't obey the laws, why would anyone else? Well, as Sagrado points out here, the barons have forced King John to sign Magna Carta to create Parliament. So the fake law requires the nobles to attend Parliament. So if they don't show up, they're breaking the law. So the proof of the fact that Magna Carta is a real law is that the nobles obey it. This is a really subtle kind of distinction here. But at this point, Simplicio can argue all he wants that Magna Carta is not a real law. But as Sagrado points out, there are two things here that are true. It has the king's signature and seal on it. The barons forced King John to sign it, but once it was signed, they obeyed it as if it were the real law. So the king may not have wanted it, but it has all of the forms and features of a real law. And Simplicio has one last argument to make, that Magna Carta limited the powers of the king, and that king's power should be unlimited. But Sagrado points out that the existence of Parliament actually made the king stronger. I hope this argument makes sense, and I hope this helps you with your writing.